recording on your side. Have you got that?
Yep.
I'm also
Hmm.
going to record it on my phone as well, just so nothing happens. Fantastic. Professor Jo Boaler, welcome back to the podcast. It is so lovely to see you. How have you been?
Thank you. Thank you for having me back. I have been, how have I been?
What's happening? Yes.
What can I share sitting here at this time in the United States? Um, yeah, learning to overcome challenges.
And you mentioned as you before we hit record that you just returned from Denmark. Uh,
Yes, and
how was
Norway.
that experience? So I've only been there once. Absolutely loved it. But how was the experience over in
It
Denmark?
was great. I went to Norway first, and I was working with educators over there, and so the National Centre of Science and Mathematics Education, and then district in Oslo. Then hopped across to Denmark and was working with some educators and leaders there.
Amazing.
So
Did you get
it
to have
was great.
any Copenhagen ice cream while you were there?
I didn't. I did see a lot of people eating ice cream and was kind of confused because it's really cold.
Nice.
Is that
Joe,
a thing, eating ice cream in Copenhagen?
I think they're very famous for their ice cream. And I remember distinctly as a
Know
kid
that.
moving to Legoland, Denmark, and eating more ice cream than was advised.
That would explain why so many people were eating ice cream. I was confused.
Yeah. Joe, last time we had a conversation, which seems like an eternity ago in world events, but we talked about, I would say, 18 months ago. You recommended this book called Lessons in Chemistry. I haven't read it yet. It's just arrived at my door this morning. But is there another book that you've read recently that has caused you to reconsider a few things in your life? It could be personally, could be professionally.
Ooh, that's a hard question. I have to think about that.
That's it.
Um,
We
I,
can always come
I
back to that.
have just read a book that I really appreciated. It's by somebody who's sort of a self-help guru kind of
Okay.
person called Mel Robbins.
Oh, yeah.
And the book I just read is called Let Them.
Right. Fantastic.
And I actually found it very helpful. It's a book that shares that we should not worry so much about what other people think or people who are attacking us, which I have a lot of,
Absolutely.
um, or people who disagree with you. It's sort of getting you to reframe how you live and not be sort of thrown around by
Lovely.
those
I,
outside forces.
Fantastic. And I think that this podcast is becoming quite expensive. My reading list is every time I get off the phone call to someone, a new order is placed on Amazon. So I'm sure to add that. And before we jump into your work, Joe, and obviously we talked a little bit about your background last time we spoke. So I'll make sure I put a link to that podcast in the show notes. But what's a skill that you are currently working on? Once again, could be personally, professionally. In my family, we're trying to learn the ukulele because my daughter had a performance that didn't go her way last year, so we're trying to get better at that. But is there
Mm.
something that a skill that you're currently refining
Hmm.
in 2025?
I am trying to do more sketching.
Okay, interesting.
Um, and just really the sketchbook kind of sketching that a lot of people are doing now. I am really devoted to my notebook. I always have a notebook with me. I always keep notes. It's sort of how I think. And I'm trying to, instead of just writing all these things, draw pictures.
Okay,
And I'm actually finding it's good for me because I sort of have to stop. My mind sometimes is going at this fast pace, and I just have to stop to draw and color in. Coloring is really peaceful.
I love that.
And yeah, so I'm trying to do more of that.
And Joe, I love a sketchbook. I love a notebook. I carry one around with me all the time. My challenge though is I have notebooks for different things. So I have one for my role as a school executive, one for a husband, one for a teacher, one for a dad, and so I end up with four little notebooks in
A
my
lot of
pocket.
notebooks.
Do you just put everything in one notebook? Have you got a shopping list in there? Have you got a
I do, and I have to resist having notebooks for different things in my life because I love buying notebooks too, and I love different kinds of notebooks. So I want to have other notebooks and I think, oh, I could do this notebook for
fantastic?
projects. But I stopped myself doing that because I travel so much and I have to have my notebook with me, and I cannot travel with three different notebooks.
Yeah.
So I
I end
make
up losing them.
everything in one.
Yeah, I end up losing them, which is really frustrating. A final kind of getting to know you question, Joe, then I really want to devote most of our conversation to your new book. What's something that you're going to that you are going to stop engaging with in 2025? Something that you've said, you know what? I'm done with that. I'm going to focus more on this.
Um,
Could be a habit. For me, it's
I
eating.
would
Oh,
like to stop um, being really knocked about by every attack that comes in on my work.
yeah.
I really work on that. And that, as I said, that book, Let Them, is helping me with that. That there are people who are just going to oppose change. It's not really personal. They don't want things to change in the world. They don't want maths to change. And those people, I've got to just carry on with my work because I know that what we're doing is helping people, and not let those attacking people bother me so much.
Joe, you're being very diplomatic.
Mhm.
I know it's been a really challenging time, and can I just say, thank you so much for your work. I don't know how many people say that to you, but it is a joy, and your work has really personally transformed the way that I teach maths. As I mentioned when we spoke before, I used to hate maths. I really did. And it was just such my experience at school was such it was a really dry and boring and
Mm.
horrible subject. And then once I began to read your work, I actually felt a little bit ripped off because I thought, where was this maths hiding the whole time in primary
Yeah,
school? And
yeah.
my job as a teacher, it's kind of like a new mission that I have after engaging with your work and also the work of, I'm not sure if you're aware of Dr. Catherine Attard from the University of Western Sydney.
Mhm.
It's really transformed the way that I teach, and I just wanted to thank you before we jump in.
Thank
And
you. Yeah, we
please
do hear,
please keep it up. We need it.
I do hear that from a lot of people saying, why didn't I have this when I was young, when they experienced it differently?
Yeah.
And they feel like you do, sort of cheated by having this, unpleasant maths experience when it could have been so joyful.
Yeah. Joe, tell me about your experience at Camden. I believe it was Camden Town Public School way back in the beginning of your
My
career.
teaching? Yeah, it was a school in Camden called Haverstock School. It is a public school. And very, very diverse school in inner city Camden town,
Mm.
which is um, very vibrant part of London, but a lot of people who live in poverty live there, and lots of languages spoken at the school. Super, amazing place to be. I loved it. So um, that was where I went there, sort of fresh from my year of doing a teaching credential and getting all these new ideas, and really wanted to share them with kids. And as I share in Mathish, my very first class was a class of 13-year-olds who'd just been put into the lowest
Right.
ability group. And the very first word said to me in my first teaching moment was, "Why should we bother?" And I just was floored. I didn't know what to say. They'd been put into this group where they were only going to get low grades. That was all that was. And
And that was said by a teacher.
no, a 13-year-old.
Gosh, that's even worse. But yeah, wow.
Uh, yeah, actually, I ended up working with her and getting her put in for the higher exam, and she passed it and ended up with a career because of it. But she was destined to if you get put into the lowest groups in the UK, you take an exam where you can only get a D, an E, or an F.
Gosh.
And that just seems wrong. We don't know what 13-year-olds can do. We shouldn't
No.
be making now. Here in the US, those kind of decisions are made even younger when kids are 7 or 8. And that's part of what we've been trying to change. And
Shocking. Joe, tell me about math-ish, and excuse me if I say maths.
Yes.
It
Maths.
is.
I was wondering whether to call it maths-ish, but it seemed like a lot of S's.
It does. Tell me about that. Why write this book and why write it now? And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, I hadn't written a book on maths for 10 years. I wrote Mathematical Mindsets 10 years ago now. And I just knew there was a lot of new research that needed to get out there and thought it was a good time to share some of the research from recent years.
I think,
But
sorry, yeah,
I don't know if you want me to, but I was gonna talk about what ish is.
I'd love to. Yes. It
Um,
sounds messy, which is wonderful because it's not something that I traditionally associate with mathematics. So what on earth?
yeah,
Why
not
ish?
not what most people associate with maths. Everybody associates maths with precision and being super precise. But as I was writing the book, it occurred to me that nearly all the time when we use maths in the world, we use it in an ish kind of way. So, we can have conversations with our kids like, how much of the moon can we see tonight? Or how much rain fell last night? Or how long is this drive to the airport? Or
Yeah.
can I have half of that cookie? I could give you 1,000 examples, and in all cases, the numbers are kind of ish. They're not really precise. So we have this big sort of disconnect between the maths in the world, which is very ish, and then the maths in classrooms, which is all about precision. But so that was something I wanted to raise. But also, I know that when kids take an ish perspective, so if I had something like, I don't know, 20 divided by 8, say, if you ask people, what is it ish? Don't work it out precisely, just kind of what ish number would it be? What I know is it helps people think more conceptually. They don't get lost inside calculations. They're thinking conceptually about the numbers. So I just put it out there that we should invite our kids to come up with an ish number before they calculate.
Love that.
And I shared it at a conference, and this teacher immediately went into her classroom. She was a sixth grade teacher and talked to her kids about ish numbers and said, we're going to come up with an ish number before we calculate. And the kids just grabbed onto it immediately. And I know that what I'm saying is we should estimate more, but I also know that kids hate to estimate.
Mm,
And ask them to estimate in classrooms, they're often like, ugh, why do I have to do that? But when we say to them, come up with an ish number, it's as though it frees them in
mm,
really interesting ways. They become more willing to share their answers. Teachers are telling me it's just completely changing the classroom environment. All these kids are willing to give an ish answer that were not willing to engage before.
yeah,
So
I
I
love
really
that.
like that.
Yeah, I love that. As I mentioned, I was reading your book on a recent cruise that I went on with my family, and the amount of teachers
Mhm.
tend to find each other.
Yeah.
And even though it is school holidays over in Australia, so I honestly, I probably had about 20 or so teachers come up to me and say, "Are you a teacher?" And first of all, I forgot. I'm like, "How do you know that?" And then I remembered that I was reading your book beside the pool. I remember we just had these wonderful conversations with so many about with them about the concept of ishness, if you like.
Mhm.
And it was wonderful to hear wonderful to hear people's experiences teaching mathematics and how we really need to stop seeing maths as just a rigorous um,
Mhm.
subject that kind of catches people out. And I think, and one of the things I was reminded of from our last conversation is this whole idea of maths anxiety and
Yeah,
students not wanting to engage. I see it every day when I teach kids and I ask them questions. Kids that don't want to answer because they may be wrong or they've been told that if they're not
right.
100% accurate, they
Yeah,
can't engage. I mean, you work a lot in that space of maths anxiety, and is that something which you're really trying to overcome with this book?
definitely. And there are lots of ideas in the book. It isn't just all about taking ish numbers.
Yes, of
Um,
course.
and there are lots of things I talk about, I guess, how many people have anxiety and how what we now know is what you believe about maths actually changes your mathematical processing in the brain. They've shown that in brain studies. It's not like you have these beliefs and they're separate from what you can do with maths. They actually shape what you can do mathematically. So we really need to work on giving kids joyful maths experiences where they come to love the subject and letting go of all of it's all about precision, it's all about getting high marks, it's all about pressure. And that, when we take away that pressure, it frees their minds and they do much better.
I love that. And Joe, one of the many things I've started doing since reading your work is trying to really think about those connections between mathematical concepts and mathematical terms. And I can't remember the specifics, but I remember you saying that you saw it on someone's classroom wall. You saw
Oh,
all the
yeah, the
different concepts
connections.
and then connections with string. And I did that with my students, and it was an absolute game changer. And
Oh,
at the
really?
yeah, at the end of the semester, our kids didn't want to take it down because they
Uh-huh.
had all of these. So, for example, Johnny saw a connection between 2D space and time, and Melissa saw
Mm.
a
So
connection
great.
between statistics and data, and it was
Yeah.
wonderful. And this wall display became something which was treasured. It was really,
Mm.
really wonderful to see.
Love
And
that.
you talk a lot about that, don't you, Joe, about these connections between
Yeah.
mathematical concepts and ideas. And what are some of the things that educators can do that can really help to build those connections?
Well, that is a great idea. I saw that in a teacher's classroom. She put up sort of big concepts in maths up on the wall and just invited kids. If you see a connection between
Mm.
two or more concepts, tell me. And then they connected them on the wall with a piece of string, and the kids wrote the connection on a post-it note and they put that post-it note on the string. And that's just a lovely way of bringing back those connections that are so important in maths.
Yeah.
Part of the reason kids don't do well in maths and don't like it is they see it as just a lot of disconnected methods and rules. And so that's a great thing that teachers can do, make a connections
Yeah.
poster, invite kids to see connections.
I think that's so important. I believe that was that Sarah Nolan's.
There, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, and I stole that as great educators do. We pinch the best ideas and incorporate them into
Yeah.
our classrooms, and it was wonderful to see that. And we like for me, it really made me start to think out of these really narrow defined terms in mathematics. I'm very great. I'm very fortunate at the moment with the New South Wales Department of Education to be able to have those conversations around
Mm.
the broadness and the complexity of maths. I mean, another thing that I absolutely love doing with my students after engaging with your work is work around number talks and number sense,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just seeing how students come alive when they see the complexity and the
Yeah.
beauty of numbers. Would you mind maybe talking a little bit about that? How can we create a number sense rich classroom, specifically with our primary school students?
Yeah, I think part of the problem kids have is in many classrooms, we introduce them to numbers and then really quickly we move on to
Mm.
operations. And what kids need is just more time exploring numbers. What are they? How can you break them apart and see the numbers inside numbers? What do they look like visually? How are they in the world? Where do we see those numbers in the world? And so number talks are great, and those have been in education for a long time, but where you just put up a number problem and then collect all the kids' different ways of seeing it. But the other thing I talk about in the book is groupitizing.
Mm.
That's a newish term from a colleague at Stanford that builds on the idea of subitizing. Subitizing is the brain's we have a natural ability to look at a collection of dots and say how many there are without counting them up to five. But over five, we either have to count them or look for patterns. So he came up with this term groupitizing that
Yeah.
if you have, say, 10 dots, you might see it as 5 and 5 or 4 and 4 and 2. But what they found in their research, which was I thought was incredible research, was that kids' ability to separate dots or whatever into different groups, to groupitize, predicted their maths achievement in standardized tests
Wow.
all the way up to grade 8, more than how good they were with arithmetic or how well they knew maths facts. It was their ability to separate numbers into smaller numbers, to
Gosh.
see how numbers are made
Gosh.
that was so impactful.
And
And that, is a sort of building block of number sense.
Yeah, I love that. And is that was it Bruce McCandless? Is that his
Yes. Mhm.
research? Um,
Yes.
I loved like in your book seeing and I was trying to quickly find it, but I haven't referenced the page, so my apologies. But there was a group of dots that students were supervising, and then seeing the different ways that they saw it. Like some students could see three or four dots on the side, then a cluster in the
Yeah,
middle.
right,
Others
right.
saw it in rows, and I had no idea that there were so many different ways
I know
that
it's
students, and there were probably 20 or 30
stunning.
different ways.
Yes. No, I
And
had no idea either. So I was doing this at Stanford with a big group of
mm,
girls who we'd invited for the day. And I did, it's called a dot card number talk. So I showed them 7 dots and I asked them what patterns do you see? Like what groups of dots do you see? And as you say, they came up with like 25 different ways of seeing these dots. And I had no idea either. I was just like, okay, there's another and another and another. So these dot card number talks are really good for kids and they
mm,
love them. When I was teaching a summer camp last, we would do them with the kids, and every morning when we got in, they'd beg us to do another dot card number talk with them.
gosh.
Actually, when I was this was interesting. When I was in Denmark last week, somebody showed me a book in Danish that has been written about mine and other people's work. This is a
Oh,
picture of,
oh wow, you've made it into a Danish book. This is great.
yeah. And in this, they have lots of these
Oh
dot
wow.
cloth
Wow.
and different ways.
I love that.
It's
I
hard
can
to see this, but
yeah,
they back.
I love that, Joe.
Yeah, so I think these just spending more time with groups of numbers and this, look at this, spending more time with groups of numbers and seeing how they're made up, and
Yeah.
you you can do this groupitizing with lots of things. You can just give kids dice. And one of my favorite activities is have them drop 10 dice and then figure out how would you know how many numbers you've got
Yeah.
by grouping the dice. So kids can physically hold them, which is really nice,
Love that.
and move them into different groups. So all of that, just playing with numbers is
It's
really
so
what kids
and
need.
it's so much fun. Like it is like
Yeah.
it is so much fun, and I'm currently doing a specialization in primary maths, and part of that is because of your incredible work, and I'm just so excited to unpack and rediscover or discover in many ways for the first time this subject that I really had no idea about. And
Mm,
my frustration and my anger at how it was represented to me in primary school has subsided, and
mhm.
now I want to try and make sure that no other student has that experience because it is just wonderful. And so really is a beautiful subject. My wife is sick of me talking about maths, but it's really lovely to see. And Joe, why do you think that students' abilities to supervise is an accurate predictor of how they will they
Yeah, I mean,
experience
that's an interesting
exams?
question. I don't know the answer, but I would say my guess would be that as kids are engaging with numbers and seeing how numbers are inside numbers and how you can break numbers up in different ways, that is the beginning of number sense and number flexibility, which we also know predicts maths achievement, like high achieving kids engage with numbers flexibly, and that seems to be really important. So you can see that that's probably a building block of that, the beginning of seeing numbers flexibly, of seeing how numbers can be broken into other numbers. The kids who are unsuccessful in classrooms don't see numbers like that. They see them as
Wow.
very fixed, and they think they have to memorize methods to act on the numbers that are fixed.
Yeah. And Joe, you talk so much about maths as a visual experience, and we've talked a little bit about that.
Mhm.
And in your book, you reference the importance of mathematical representations and your beloved West Brom, your experience growing up watching West Brom in England. Tell me a little bit about that. Like we've touched on the importance of representations, but why is that so important? And my understanding is that it helped you understand American football a little bit more.
Oh, yeah. The mental representations, I can't remember now how I managed to bring West Brom into the book, but I did,
I
right?
was reading that thinking, yeah, that's a link. The link's there. Yeah.
Yes, I managed to bring it in. Yeah, that's really interesting work from Anders Ericsson and
Yes.
others about the importance of mental representations being your brain. I mean, I also talk about this research that all of us, as we go around the world, we have developed mental models of the things we interact with in the world. So if I asked you to think about a stapler,
Yeah.
you would probably be able to think about what a stapler looks like, but also what it feels like, how you act on it, the sound it makes, what happens when you use a stapler. So you've developed this full mental model of a stapler. And what they know is kids need mental models of mathematical ideas. Um, they shouldn't just have these abstract numbers, and it really helps if they've looked at and held and moved and built mathematical ideas. So I talked about, yeah, they know that experts sort of see the world in these mental models, and they very much see patterns in the world. And I think the example of sport was, a novice can look at a pitch of 22 players or however many players on the pitch and really just see chaos, just
Yeah.
players all over the place. Whereas an expert will look at that pitch and see patterns, see how the
Yeah.
midfield's moving and where the strikers are. And that is what expertise is, where you start to see these patterns. And yeah, so just seeing maths, building these mental models of maths. I think I shared an example of during our summer teaching, we did one of my favorite activities, which is
Yeah.
called Painted Cube. And kids build a cube, a 4x4x4 cube out of sugar cubes.
Yeah.
And then they work out that if you painted all the outside in blue or color, how many of the little squares would have one side blue, two sides blue. It's really a great activity. But we did this with our kids in the summer camp. And a whole year later, when we interviewed one of the students and said, is there anything from the camp that you remember? He described in detail this cube. And he said, I still remember that sugar cube. I remember what it felt like in my hand. I remember the size of it. I remember what it looked like. And he probably
Gosh.
remembered what it tasted like too, because they all ate them.
Someone would
Um,
always eat. Yeah.
but he said, I use it in my geometry questions all the time. And we had to estimate the volume of our shoes last week. So I just imagine my shoe filled with sugar cubes. So this is a kid who's developed a mental model of a cube, and he developed it through holding it and using it and touching it and feeling it. And really, kids need that with everything in maths.
I love that, Joe, and it's on my list of to do before I go back to school is that cubes activity.
Oh,
I have
yeah.
the privilege of being in a number of classrooms, and one of my commitments this year is to really help students to redefine their perception of mathematics. And
Mhm.
I'm going to be taking, I've taken a lot of notes and examples from your book. And I can just imagine the excitement now in my classrooms doing that activity and the buzz and it's really incredible. And what a great
Yeah.
way to get students to begin to conceptualize and to visualize.
Yeah.
And now that student many years later is using that activity in other
Hmm.
areas of life. It's really, really
Right.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Uh, Joe, tell me a little bit about your experience with mathematics in school. Were you, looking back, did you think, yeah, I'm going to be a professor of mathematics. I'm going to be
Yeah.
a world-renowned expert. Did you
I
think,
did not.
does that make you laugh when you think about that?
Yes, that does make me laugh. My experience of maths in school, I was, pretty good at maths, but I didn't like it much.
Interesting.
It was really just, t the teacher would literally stand with her back to the class and just list questions on the board. And I would just sit with my notebook and answer the questions. And so I thought it was, procedural, not very interesting until I started doing A-level maths. And I had this teacher, Mrs. Marshall, who
Right.
just changed maths for me completely. And what she did was she would come in and give us these math problems, but invite us to talk about them in groups. And that was it. That was what changed it. Just sitting there with other people talking about the ideas just made it a wholly different subject for me. And I felt differently about myself and, my relationship with maths. So from then, that was the
Love that.
beginning of me seeing it differently.
Love that. Did
And
you ever
then
get a
the
chance to
other,
speak with her?
actually, I emailed her maybe 2 years ago, just
Right.
totally out of the blue. She's retired. She's, I don't know, in her 70s, I think, or more. And yeah, we chatted over email and I sent her a picture and she was
Love that.
remembering. So that was nice.
And
But
Jo,
the
sorry.
other maths changing time for me was during my teacher training. That was when I did that at London University, and that was when I was introduced to really cool maths problems and
Yeah.
visual maths and
So, Joe, how quite often I love the saying that says people will remember how you made them feel. How
Mm.
did her classroom feel when you were in it?
Wow, it's a long time ago now, but I remember feeling more relaxed about maths. Everything up to that point had been kind of stressful, and can you just answer these questions quickly? And it became a social kind of lesson and became one of my favorite lessons. It was funny actually because I was doing A level and I had two teachers teaching A level, Mrs. Marshall and Mr. something or other. And the Mr. something or other just taught in the typical way of Mr. Hughes. His name was
You always
just
remember the bad ones as well. Like, yeah,
remember telling us methods. And then so we'd have his lesson and then we'd go to her lesson. And it was quite a contrast.
mm,
But she made the way I felt in her class was different to every class I'd had at the school. Well, I don't know, maybe
I love that.
my English teacher was also good.
Joe, you talk extensively in the book about the importance of productive struggle. How do
Mm.
we uh, build that capacity in our students? Because as an educator, I can't tell you the amount of times that I just want to jump in. I don't like seeing
Yeah.
my children, my
Yeah.
students struggle. So how do we begin
Well,
to build that capacity with our students?
it's very, very important that we share with our kids the importance of struggle. Many kids feel bad about struggling, but they don't know that struggle's really, really good for their brains. And I've found that when we share with kids, when I say to kids I teach, I want you to struggle. It's really good for your brain. It's when you're making these amazing connections and growing parts of your brain. And when they realize it's a good thing, it changes how they react to it. So I think that's the first part is communicating with kids how important it is for their brain. And it's really, you don't want to be getting everything right. That's not going to do anything to your brain.
Yeah,
But it's not just about giving those messages for kids. We have to change sort of the climate of the classroom and the school because you can't share with kids mistakes are good, struggle is good, and then give them tests and mark them down for every mistake they make.
yeah.
That is an undermining message. So it involves giving these different messages to kids, but also having the classroom be a different kind of place.
Yeah, and one of and I'm sure there will be teachers listening to this all over the world.
Mhm.
And for our Australian teachers, we are about to step back into the classroom for 2025. And one of the things that I want to do a lot more this year is to have a little bit of a pause between when I ask a question and give students the answers, because I tend to
Mm.
jump in a little bit too quickly.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Yeah.
allow students little bit of space to, we call them the
Hmm.
brain sweats in my class,
Hmm.
when you
Hmm.
start to feel like you're getting a bit hot and sweaty. And so I
Yeah.
really want to do that. Are there any other practical things that we can do as teachers to help celebrate mistakes or celebrate mathematical thinking and
Um,
processes?
well, one of the things we do when we're teaching kids is we literally celebrate mistakes and say, "Yay, synapses!" And
Yeah.
the kids start saying that. When we were teaching some middle school kids, after a while, when somebody made a mistake, they'd all go synapse, and it would be a big point of celebration. I've worked with teachers who um, everybody who makes a mistake gets 5 high fives.
Right.
Uh, um, it just turning it around to be a positive thing. I have a new online maths learning tool now. It's called Struggly,
I've seen
and
that, yes.
we called it Struggly to help make kids feel good about struggling. And they in that app they get badges for making mistakes and for struggling. So we just need to change our approach to mistakes and struggle, and kids will become really comfortable with it.
Hmm.
That's what I've found, that we can make that change for kids, and it's really an important one to make. If you're going through life or through your class afraid of making a mistake, that's a very limiting kind of
Hmm.
brain
Hmm.
place.
And I also intentionally make mistakes in front of my class.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Sometimes it's accidental, sometimes
Yeah.
it is intentional.
Yeah.
But what I've noticed is even culturally, there are some students who are more willing to point out my mistakes than others in
Mhm.
my class, which I find really, really interesting. And you
Yeah.
write extensively about diversity and how maths
Uh-huh.
it can help bridge that gap. Would you mind maybe touching a little bit on that and talk about the importance of maths and mathematical diversity? I know that's
Yeah,
a huge question,
the
but
idea of mathematical diversity is just the idea of maths being a diverse subject that you can see and experience in lots of different ways. And
yeah,
instead of maths being this black and white subject of rules and methods, it's really a diverse subject. And there are many, many ways you can experience maths, and embracing that mathematical diversity. I mean, I find that changes everything for kids when they start to see maths as a subject that you can approach it in different ways. There are different ways of seeing it. There are different ways of solving things, and valuing difference is a really important teaching strategy.
love that. Jo, I do want to be respectful of your time. So I've got a couple more questions if you don't mind. And there is no way we would be able to talk about your extensive work in a short hour-long conversation. But at the end of the book, you talk about, excuse me, 5 principles for becoming an effective change agent. And I'm just
Mm.
read out each of them if that's okay. It's always a bit strange
Sure,
to
yeah.
quote someone back to themselves, but I also think that this is good life advice.
Mhm.
But the first one, believe in yourself. The second one, practicing empathy. Third one, build a network. Four, investigate. And five, develop a warrior mindset. Why is it important for students to believe in themselves as budding mathematicians?
Well, it turns out that if you believe in yourself, you have a growth mindset, it actually changes how your brain works.
Hmm.
And you can't, I mean, it changes so much for people. They've found that when people change their mindset, it changes their learning, but it also, mindset can improve people's health. It helps people dial back on aggression. It's really a magical, almost, change for people when they start to believe. And so I can't underscore enough how important that self-belief is. And some people find it hard to believe in themselves because they've been criticized so much all their lives, and they've been put down, and then self-belief is really harder to develop.
Yeah.
But it's so important.
It's I think it's incredibly important, Joe. And obviously, sorry, I've just finished reading once again the amazing work of Angela Duckworth, who is
Mhm.
an incredible individual. And Grit is another book that I have read time and time again. You're someone that has had to be quite gritty in your career. I mean that with
Yes,
all the respect in the world,
yes.
but tell me about what that experience has been like, because it can't be easy being a voice of change in a really regulated
Yeah.
system. So,
Well,
what's that been like, and what keeps you going? Because anybody else, I think, would have probably given up.
it has, I've thought about giving up, and
But please don't. Please don't
it
give up.
has been pretty rough. Because it all got really bad for me when I was asked to be one of the writers of a new framework, a math framework for California.
Yeah,
It's not even changing any standards or anything like that. It's just advice about teaching. And it came from a committee of 20 educators who shared what ideas they wanted to put out there. And I was one of the writers. But people who don't want maths change decided to target me. None of the 20 people on the committee, none of the other writers, they decided to target me because they think I have a lot of influence. And they just went up, they went after me. So tried to, destroy my research, my credibility, it's really, yeah, really bad. The first round of death threats I got was when Tucker Carlson put my image on his show. I don't know if you know him, but
I
he's
do.
a Fox News host, although he's not with Fox News at the moment. But yeah, he put my image on his show and said I was promoting social justice in math. So that got me a whole load of, threats. And then it went from there. Elon Musk went after me on X, and it just became crazy. And
And Joe,
for promoting conceptual maths.
it's absolutely crazy. And I've read the article that you placed on your that's on your
Oh
Stanford
yeah. Mhm.
profile a number of
Yeah.
times. The first time I couldn't quite believe what it was saying. And the second time, it took a few times to read through and go, oh my goodness. So I'll make sure that everyone has a link to that in the show notes. But apart from talking about sort of the impact of that on your career, what's that like as a person? Because at the end of the
Yeah,
day, you're a person, you have feelings, you've got family, you've got
exactly.
loved ones.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
to come under that level of
Yeah.
scrutiny for something that you're doing professionally seems bizarre, absolutely bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was horrible. I can't really put it any other way, but I um do try and reframe it and recognize that people come after you because they think you can impact the system. This broken system that only lets some kids go forward is what we were trying to change. And there were people who didn't want that system changed, and they saw me as the person changing it. So something I share with educators, I share in the book, is to realize if you're not getting pushback in this day and age, you're probably not being disruptive enough because
Mm.
there are people who want this system to stay as it is.
And
Um,
and once again, I think the book that you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation by Mel Robbins is an important read. I think for
yeah.
that, and you talk point number five is the importance of developing a warrior mindset. I
Mhm.
think if anyone that should be credited to you. I think I just can't believe that people would, yes, care so deeply about discrediting someone for a
Yeah.
trying to make maths better for students.
It's kind of hard to believe, but um,
But that's the
I,
state that
I
we're in.
guess what keeps me going though is I know that when we teach conceptually and visually, it's better for kids and they do better and teachers are happier and there's no doubt in my mind that we need that. So that's what keeps me going. I know it helps people so much. So they can try and shut me up, but it's not going to work.
Joe, tell me about the True Believer network.
Oh, that was funny, isn't it?
I thought
Yeah,
that was a
I,
wonderful use of a hashtag.
I turned up at a conference a few years ago in New Mexico, and there were two women sitting in the audience with bright red t-shirts on, and on the t-shirt it said "True Believer." And people use my last name as an adjective these days, and I thought that was really sweet, and I took their picture. I have it on my Instagram actually, and yeah, I thought that was
Really
cute.
wonderful.
But those two women shared with me that they had been bringing about change in their district and having a group of people who were all working towards this different maths, and they came under attack from
Oh,
people accusing them of being a cult. I get this accusation too, that it's a cult. And so I know that a lot of people who are trying to bring out bring about good in the system are vulnerable to being attacked by in some ways, verbally or, brought down, and people writing things about them, and
Gosh.
developing a good mindset around that is probably
Yeah.
something we all need.
Joe, it seems like change is happening though, which I
Mhm.
think is
In
really,
education, yeah.
yeah. Like I mean, you have to be hopeful, but
Yeah.
I'm pretty hopeful. I see, and the proof is very much in what's happening in classrooms. Like I've seen the difference of teaching maths in a conceptual way, and I've
Yeah.
seen the difference with my students in a first-hand experience of seeing kids that used to hate maths, just like me,
Mhm.
uh,
Yeah.
actually enjoying and engaging in the subject.
Too.
And
Hmm.
I think it's really wonderful to see that there is a bit of a buzz and a bit of a frustration in the way that mathematics is being taught. And I think there is change, and I'm optimistic, and I'm incredibly and I mean this, I'm incredibly grateful for your work because it has changed the way that I teach. And so I'm sure way over in your office in Stanford, as you're writing these articles, please be aware that there are people reading them. There are people reading your work, and it's really causing light bulb moments for so many. I mean, I've got a wonderful a lady that I work with, a lady called Evelyn, who will be listening to this, and she
Hmm.
has changed the game in the way that I
Mm.
maths. And
Hmm.
seeing her come in and use many of your ideas, many of the productive struggles and supertizing, all of these things which you talk about
Hmm.
and your colleagues discuss, and seeing how that has changed the game in terms of how we teach maths. So it is happening all over the world. And
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I, I
I,
thank you for that. And if you want me to be the chair of the True Believer movement in Sydney, I'm happy to do that.
okay. I'll
We'll
send
get
you a
you.
t-shirt.
Thank you. Joe, final question. As I mentioned, there are teachers in Australia about to go back into the classroom, either for the first
Mhm.
time or for the 10th or 15th time. What advice would you give them in terms of how to teach maths moving forward?
I
Short but
would say my short advice is to approach maths as a playful, joyful subject. Get kids to come up with ish numbers. That's a really quick and easy change that changes kids' approach relationship with maths, I think. So, but make it fun. Bring in games, bring in puzzles, give kids some of the tasks on YouCubed, and just be flexible. It's really not about getting kids to learn all these methods and rules. It's about seeing maths as this flexible subject.
And Joe, I know that I said that was the last question, but I'm a dad to two very strong, independent girls.
And
What's something that I can do each night with my daughters to help them fall in love with maths? Is it a activity around number talks? Is it looking at supertizing? How can we begin to, it's probably not one thing, but how can we begin to build that lifelong passion of love and excitement for this beautiful
well,
project?
any game with dice is really good for kids' number sense.
Yeah,
And I think the more we can play games with kids, the more they'll develop mathematically. So I would definitely recommend that. And just helping kids see that maths is really about seeing patterns in the world. Where do we see patterns? And getting them having this pattern seeking mindset
I love it.
is really good too.
Fantastic. I'll let you know how they go. But
Yeah, let me know.
Professor Jo Boaler, thank you so much for the time for your time today. I know you've done really well considering the jet lag. And honestly, thank you for your commitment to reframing the conversation around maths. It truly is making a difference, and I am a definitely a true believer. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's good to talk with you.